welcome Dr. Tracy Fitzsimmons.
I was lucky enough to go to a college where the most coveted leadership positions were the elected positions of those who ran what was called the Student Volunteer Council. That was the most coveted position, the most sought after, and it was highly, it wasn't one of those only one person ran for election. And I think those kinds of things get burned into us, and we never really forget them. And they go on to impact our lives and what we do, how we lead our own lives, but how we help others build model good citizenship. So welcome to Shenandoah. And some of you, probably a lot of you, are far ahead of where Shenandoah was 5 years ago. And we have jumped in over the last 5 years, led by Karen, led by faculty such as John and his colleagues who have been pushing us for years. We finally caught up and caught your vision. And I want to say thank you, first of all, because so many of you have been willing to share and help us catch up. And through, you're one of them. You led the way for so many. I know you and Kathy Howard started this organization. But for us, you are willing to come and work with our faculty and our staff members and help sort of share the vision and spread that. I really appreciate that kind of learning. We try to do it in our classrooms, right? We try to model co-learning in our classrooms, and sometimes we forget to do that at institutions. For me, my very favorite semester every year is fall, because it's also the semester in which I teach. And it's my most chaotic semester, as you can imagine, as you're trying to work with institutional values and fundraising you're supposed to do, but make sure you're in the classroom every day. And so today is one of my teaching days. I'm really, really excited about it. And actually what they're doing today is the class is working on choosing an engagement project, a service project together that will reflect our class, which is about development and disaster relief. So today they're coming to class prepared to put out their vision of what our class should be doing, and then they're going to have a group dialogue in sort of a jigsaw puzzle model to make the decision, hopefully by the end of today. So I may pick up some seeds of wisdom along the way. I wanted to touch on a couple things. And the first is to let you know that what you do have is unintended consequences. You're not doing this for this reason at all, nor should you. But I want to tell you that as president, what I see is that the more engaged our universities are, the stronger our reputations as institutions. That's not a reason to do it, but let me tell you, it's really helpful. Okay? That means it also has an impact, what you're doing on the marketing and the admissions and recruitment for the institution. The more you're doing, the more the word gets out, the more likely students are to self-select into your institutions. They want to be in a place that's involved, that's giving back. And so you're working on that. And whether you know it or not, God knows it's not the reason to do it, but the work you do really helps us in fundraising. Nobody wants to give to an institution that looks like it only cares about itself and its students. Okay? And so the work you're doing is helping us with fundraising. They're great stories to tell. We use the stories all the time of the amazing work of our students and faculty. And I hope we use them in very positive ends to go back and to be able to fund funds that we all need to reinvest into our education and the services that we offer to students. And I think it's particularly helpful because too often in the private sector world and in Virginia, where our publics are so incredibly well known as well, oftentimes people think that higher education is elitist or it's only for a certain group of people, particularly in these hard economic times. And to be able to be clear about the stories that we tell and that our students and faculty don't come with blinders on and don't just look at our institutions, that we're really thinking much more broadly about the communities in which we live is very helpful. Help people understand that we think education is about being inclusive. So thank you for the work that you're doing there. I'm a political scientist. And I sort of never left that behind. John moves out. I feel more than anything, I feel like my heart is still being a faculty member. And so I'm a political scientist that was trained, and I do Latin American politics. And my specialty within that is women's issues and democratization. And so I spent those formative years in Latin America during the civil wars in Central America, during the era of democratization in South America. I was in the room when the first elections in Chile in 19 years had happened, and Elwin, or Behe, conceded to Elwin. I was like in the front row, 5 feet from them. It was an incredibly powerful moment. And I can tell you, what you're doing, we don't think of it here like this, but what you're doing is dangerous. It is subversive, and it's what I love. Because when you're in an authoritarian regime, the last thing those military leaders or the authoritarian dictator wants is for people to do good, people to gather together in community and help each other, to do outreach and volunteer projects, because that allows them a sense of we are in this together, and we have power, we can have impact, we can move things along and improve them. Because once you catch that fever, you look beyond as a community and start thinking, where else can I do this? It's the power of women's sewing cooperatives in Latin America during the dictatorships, because women would get together to crochet or to sew quilts or blankets, and you'd get together in your community, you'd sit. There was nothing. It was just fun to make sure everybody had something warm. You can sit around and then somebody say, how's life? Oh, it's great. How's your family? Oh, my family's great. Yeah. Oh, I was working on apple pie on Thursday night. Yeah. How's Joey? Fine. Not so good. I haven't seen my Joey in a while. I said, you haven't seen him. Is he on the trip? I don't really know where he is. Because they came and got him last week. Don't know who they was. Not saying anything. Just they came and got him in the middle of the night. And then somebody will say, tomorrow, I'm so sorry. Well, what do you know? And then somebody else will say, my husband hasn't been home for 3 weeks. Because he's disappeared. And then just start talking. And it's a very powerful moment when they go from looking down to looking up at each other's eyes. And somebody will say, I know it sounds crazy, but I swear I saw a body floating down the Winchester River last night. Somebody else will say, I saw it too. And pretty soon, the women's sewing group has gone from sewing blankets to help others keep warm to thinking about how can I help you and you and you make sure nobody else disappears from your family. And this is wrong that we live in this kind of society. Let's get more people together to sew blankets and find out if they're seeing the same thing. And by the end of every night, they're talking about what they can do to stop it. And when they hook up with that communal soup kitchen over there, or that group that was building houses, and then pretty soon they find out they're all having the same conversations and they all feel like this is wrong. And then that snowballs. And then you get a political movement. And so engagement and volunteerism is something that dictatorships don't welcome, because there's power in community and in doing good together, and it gives you an opportunity to exchange ideas. It is more than just one project for one organization or one family. It is much more powerful than that. That's why I believe in it so deeply, because I saw those movements begin in one or two projects here or there, and they have an incredibly powerful snowball effect. And standing in line for 8 hours with the women in Chile to vote for the first time, some of them in their lives, and hearing how they came to their own consciousness of deciding that this was not the right political system. It all started like that. The story I just told. We have such a luxury of living in a country that is democratic, where we can have those fabulously engaging or entertaining political debates on television. But they exist, and this is great, and we can talk about it. And even though this wouldn't be an appropriate place to do it, you could all jump in right now and tell us what you thought about it, and it would be okay because of the system in which we live. And it also gives us the freedom to do lots of non-political organizing, but that has at its heart a core value of community and democracy. And it's too easy for us to live here and be complacent about it. And it is far too easy to take out your loans, have a grandparent pay for your college tuition, go to college where we're safe in our dorms, where we've got great learning going on, and to stay there. It's too easy to do that. And so I'm grateful to all of you and to staff and faculty with whom you work, who nudge us all out of our offices and of our residence halls to get out and be thinking more broadly. It does have a lot of other incredibly positive effects. Broadly, for everything we do, but each one of those is an individual, amazing student story. Now I'll end by saying, 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago, in January of 2010, I sat in my office with 2 of our students from Haiti and cried with them and prayed with them for 48 hours, basically, until we found out that their families were alive. But they found out that their school had collapsed, and that it was a school for 5,000 kids, that their father was the director of it. And of the 5,000, about 500 did not make it through the earthquake. And so we talk about students needing to learn to be good citizens, and then all of us should work to be role models and work alongside them as individuals. But one of the things we often miss is talking about how our institutions should be good citizens as well. You can ask for good citizenship of lots of individuals that still not be a good role model as an institution. And so we talked a lot about that here. And so for Shenandoah, that meant we weren't only going to encourage people to think about Haiti, but we wanted to do something as an institution. And so Shenandoah committed to rebuild that school for 5,000 kids. So while we're fundraising for new buildings in here as well, we raised about $300,000 to rebuild that school. Got 100,000 left to go. We got them up in temporary quarters, up and running, and provided them with structural engineers and grief counselors, and a lot of our students went out and participated. It's been an incredible experience as an institution. And the hard part is remembering that it's still got to be a value until it gets up and running, and then we continue a partnership. And as a piece of that, when we went down on one of the first trips, a physician assistant, faculty member, and student were with us. And people knew that they had come, they heard, and they lined up for blocks. Because the only kind of medical care you got after the earthquake was if you were about to die. And so everybody else got turned away from the makeshift hospitals, which meant that a lot of people had really severe cuts, and they weren't seen by medical professionals, or they'd had their leg amputated, they'd gotten the medical care they needed in those first 2 or 3 weeks, but then 6 weeks later there was nobody to follow up with. So they came in droves. And this father, who was a teacher at the school, brought us his daughter and said, "Can you help her?" And she had been buried in the earthquake in their home when it collapsed, which is up on a hillside. And she didn't have a good air pocket. And when they dug her out 2.5 hours later, they thought she was dead. And they put her body aside and cried. And the next morning, when the sun rose, they rose to bury her. And when they were cleaning her body, she opened her eyes. And they screamed, "She's alive!" And they rushed her down the mountain, and they tried to get her someplace. And 24 hours after the quake happened, they got her oxygen for the first time. And so when we saw her 6 weeks after the earthquake, she could not move anything. All she could do. She couldn't hold her head up, she couldn't anything, she couldn't swallow. And so the only sustenance she was getting was anything that they could get to drip down her throat. And I'm not a healthcare professional. I turned to the physician assistants and said, "Can you see this young lady, please?" And I walked away, and they came back later, and they said, "Here's the deal. This is what we think has happened. We don't know how much better she can get. If there's any hope, it's going to be with intense medical care, which is not going to happen in Haiti. And what's likely to happen in Haiti is that they will feel like they're forced to essentially put her out of the curb and let her die." And so we worked for 6 months and got her a visa and passport to come to the United States. And the U.S. Embassy allowed for her and one member of the family, so the father was the one that was chosen, and they came and they spent a semester here at Shenandoah in the fall of 2010 after the earthquake. And by the time she left here, working intensively with our physical therapy and occupational therapy students and faculty, she could laugh, and she could smile, and she could pick up a toy, and she was learning to stand on her own. And now, every 6 months, we send a team down. We send all the equipment back. The house has been mostly rebuilt. And every 6 months, we send down a team to work with her family. So it's students and faculty from here. And donors pay for it. And she just, this winter, she said her first words. And she said, "Daddy" was her first word. I was like, yes, now I just see her as mom. Her mom's been working real hard with her. And she's able to get herself up from a lying position on the bed. She can get herself up, scoot to the end of the bed. She can stand herself up. And she can walk a couple steps on her own. It's just one little girl. It's just one family. Except that I am so proud to be part of an institution, and all of you are at institutions that are like this as well, that will invest so much time and energy in doing the right thing for one child and one family for one school. And we do it because it's the right thing to do, just like all of you. And we do it because you feel compelled to somehow do it. But there's also this hope that all those students involved here at our institutions are going to replicate that for years and years to come in whatever they do. And then at the end of every month, it's not going to be what was that bottom line, how much profit did my physical therapy, clinic make, or my business, or whatever it be, how many articles did I publish, but it's how many lives did I help make better along the way as well. I don't think it's pipe dream. I think you all live that day in and day out. I wish I had more time to do what you do. And so I'm so grateful for the energy and the vision you put into it. Thank you. Thank you really much.
Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
What a great start to our morning. Thank you to President Fitzsimmons. Well, I want to again welcome you all to Shenandoah University and also to our Virginia Engage Fall meeting. My name is Bruce Stelgis. I have the pleasure of working at the College of William & Mary. And more importantly, I'm dear colleagues and friends with Karen Schultz. Karen stepped up several months ago and said she would be more than happy to host this gathering for us. So her and Lander and the rest of their staff have done tremendous work, and as you can see, are still doing tremendous work as this event unfolds. Now, without further ado, let me go ahead and start our panel. Do not hesitate if you need to take a break and use the restroom at any point. Don't hesitate to leave. But we're going to go right into our panel. So if I could ask the three panelists to come up to the front and have a seat. While they're getting seated, I will just remind you what the topic is. We're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so discussing, first as a panel, and then opening it up for questions and answers and through a discussion, how Virginia colleges and universities are developing strategies to partner within community to try to understand the complexity of poverty, and then hopefully to build coalitions based on community assets to combat poverty, to imagine the ideal that we're actually alleviating poverty. We have panelists from 3 different schools. They'll introduce themselves at greater length, but we have someone from William & Mary's Office of Community Engagement, Washington and Lee Shepherd Program for Interdisciplinary Study of Poverty and Human Capability, and then we have someone from right here at Shenandoah University. So let me just set the stage a little bit, very briefly, to describe a little bit why this work is so important. Virginia has the 7th lowest poverty rate in the nation in 2010, according to the census data, at 11.1%. So according to what we set up as the baseline for our poverty rate, 11.1%. But then when you dive a little bit more deeply into our statistics, we find that within different regions of Virginia, there's great disparity. The Southside region, 20% of our citizens are listed in under the poverty level. Southwest Virginia, 19%. West Central, 15%. Now the other end of the scale, Northern Virginia, 6%. Hampton Roads, 12%, and then Central regions, 12%. So while some might claim great sense of accomplishment, that 11th lowest poverty rate in the country, the fact is that within different regions of our Commonwealth, our citizens are struggling mightily. So I want to spend some time first asking our panelists to introduce themselves and providing an overview of their work very generally. But then I want us to be pretty brave and courageous about discussing the reality of the work that we do, how it might have an impact, how we might see our work being positively supporting our efforts, and maybe seeing our work sometimes accidentally perpetuates need. So we'll ask Melody to start and ask you to please provide an overview of your work and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thank you, Drew. Hey, everybody. I want to do a microphone check first. I feel like my voice is projecting pretty well, but I'm really tall if you didn't notice, and so I'm always paranoid that the microphone's out of range in my voice. So it's good to be here this morning, and thank you so much for having all of us as part of this panel. I'm excited to learn from my colleagues up here. I am the Associate Director of Community Engagement at William & Mary, and in that role I get to do a lot of exciting things. I get to work with some really amazing colleagues. We have really strong programs in several different focus areas. One of those is in educational programs, one is in local community involvement. There's some leadership development that we do through our office, and a lot of my work is focused on alternative books. But I also get to work very closely with Elizabeth Miller here on local community engagement and supporting the work that she does. So that's an overview of my work. My background is that I've been at William & Mary now for 4 years. I came here from Emory University in Atlanta, where I was overseeing the student volunteer program there. And before that, I was a clergy person in Philadelphia, working in an activist church on issues of social justice and community. I had a background before that doing some nonprofit management, and skipping back a few more years, I spent 3 years as a full-time volunteer after college, 2 years in Philadelphia and 1 year in South Africa. So I've been able to really experience relationships with people who live in poverty and experience all of the complexities and effects of that in very diverse settings. There's my introduction.
Thank you.
Very nice introduction. Good morning. My name is Fran Elrod. I feel like my voice is projecting, so yes, great. I work at Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, about 2 plus hours on 81 here, south on 81. And Washington and Lee is a small liberal arts private school, and has come at its community engagement through the classroom. So the genesis of its involvement really began in coursework, that coursework being an interdisciplinary study of poverty and human capability, which is a multidisciplinary course on issues of poverty, domestically speaking. That began in 1997 at Washington and Lee under the leadership of a faculty member named Harlan Beckley. From that course, and he's a religious emphasis, so he is coming from a religious emphasis perspective, but it is importantly a sort of multidisciplinary approach, and we are a secular institution. From that was built a program which has turned into a minor study on poverty and human capability, and intrinsic to that is service. So both through a summer internship program, but also all of the co-curricular programs that many of us are engaged in on our own campuses. It is the cornerstone in our thinking that engagement in the community needs to come back to the classroom. It must be engaged in your academic learning, and in that way, builds a trajectory of deep impact on the student and how they engage themselves professionally and civically for the long haul. So that's the perspective that we are moving from. My role specifically at the institution is Associate Director for Community-Based Learning, and I run a summer internship program that services a consortium of schools that have introduced poverty studies into their undergraduate curriculum. My work actually is involved in Virginia, but also throughout the United States in connecting students with internships. And for my own personal background and kind of how I found myself in this position, I'm actually a JMU graduate, and then I moved to the Navajo Reservation out in Arizona and worked for almost 4 years with adolescents out there in their tragic situations, and did some graduate studies out in Arizona on, actually it was New Mexico, Gallup, New Mexico, but it's all on the Navajo Reservation. And from there I came back to home, which was Virginia, and worked for some nonprofit institutions, local organizations in my own community, worked with Washington and Lee students who are volunteering and said, I like what they're doing. How can I get involved? And here I am. So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm John Copenhaver, Professor of Religion, also ordained in the United Methodist Church. Along with Tracy, our President Fitzsimmons, and Karen Schultz, I want to welcome you to Shenandoah University and say how happy we are you're here to be with us today, and for this theme focus on understanding and combating poverty and building coalitions with community groups to address issues of poverty and what we can do about those. It's interesting, our president mentioned the presidential debates, and I just wish if they had mentioned one for every time, 5 times they mentioned the middle class, they mentioned poverty, we'd be in a much better situation, I think, in terms of trying to address these issues. I appreciate being a part of this panel. I think even though there are just 3 of us, I like the institutional diversity. We have a public university, a private secondary university, and a church-related university. And so I want to say a little bit about what that means for us. I think there are some church-related colleges that are embarrassed by the church relationship and are running away from that as fast as they can, or else see it as historical and not lively. At Shenandoah, that's not the case. We see our relationship as historic and lively, and but not parochial. So reflected in that way. And from what I know of Virginia Wesleyan, I don't know Bridgewater as well, but it's a sister United Methodist related university. I think that they're very active in their relationship with the church. The last 2 presidents here at Shenandoah University have embraced that church-related heritage and devoted significant resources to helping the church. We're kind of returning the favor for the benefits that the church has given. Though there's no required chapel here at Shenandoah University, I think much of the dynamism of our mission, our service, and our efforts at combating poverty reflect the Wesleyan heritage of the university. So I want to just say a word about Wesley. For Wesley, the works of mercy, which are feeding the hungry, caring for the sick, visiting those in prison, and so forth, was indispensable to his understanding of salvation. It's not like this is something you add on. It's not a tack on. And he believed that genuine faith compelled Christians to serve the needy. But it's interesting, he was also a very careful student of emerging industrial economy of England. And he and his brother Charles complained about public authorities about inadequate wages, insufficient economic safety nets, the contamination of water, air, and soil. He railed against the exploitation and dispossession of the poor. He lambasted colonialism and the slave trade, and concern for the poor became a litmus test for social witness of his day. So I just want to say a word. This is a slide from, many of you may know the work of the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. You can go to their website. If you look under advocacy, you can find this. But what I like about this is it looks at those what are traditionally called the works of mercy on the left and the works of justice on the right. And what I find in most churches and most campus ministries and also in most campuses is that we're pretty good at the works of mercy in terms of feeding the hungry. We did that Stop the Hunger Now. We provided 20,000 meals. We send out students to Guatemala and different places for service. But we're not as good on this side of moving things and looking at the institutional problems and the structural injustices that are a part of our society. And I think there's good reason for that. I think our president, it's controversial. They're sometimes seen as subversive. And so that's the other part of this. And so I think that's part of what we're trying to do, is to bring in this side of that. So I'll just say from my perspective, I think that probably the best way to express that is a famous quote from Domhelder Kumar. Some of you remember this quote. He says, when I feed the poor, people call me a saint. When I ask why people are poor, they call me a communist. So that's often the part of that. So what we're trying to do as a professor of religion here, we created something called a Just Faith program. We got resources from the university. We have a dozen students each year coming as a cohort, and we're trying to relate, it's not just faith, but justice and faith. And we're working with lay people that we hope to get into leadership roles in churches to relate justice and faith issues. Just last year, we had a regional forum on poverty that was sponsored by the Department of Religion, the Valley Interfaith Council here in Winchester, and the Northern Shenandoah Valley Regional Commission. And we had service providers and faith communities united along with the public services of the Regional Commission of this area. And we looked at this, there were 100 people who came together to work on this. Now we're trying to work at issues. One of the things that's happening now is related to this, we're moving people out of rental housing. They're staying in motels. And through this, we've been able to move people. They've been able to help move people from hotels into permanent housing, reducing their costs, getting people out of that, and doing things of that sort. So, and we're also addressing predatory lending. And to me, the other side for us as institutions of higher education is that this is research and analysis that goes on the second side, and that directly relates to what we do, both as you mentioned in the classroom and in what we do through our co-curricular activities.
Thank you, John. This is such a great start to what I was hoping we would accomplish, is that we can spend some time, I can spend some time asking them to talk about what are they observing in community, but I think we know generally what folks would say. There are great needs in community, and that we haven't been successful in really ending need. So I want to move a little deeper more quickly, because I think we've already started to do that. I want to ask, as part one to this, is what are, and I won't even say the word best practices, but what are better practices, or what are some strategies that each of you have taken to understand more clearly both strength areas in community and then needs in community? And what are some proactive steps that you see in the university or yourself take to trying to combat poverty? And all three of you have done a wonderful job starting that conversation, but maybe we'll ask Melanie to start again and go Fran and John.
Okay. I want to approach this question from a few different angles, because my experience has been, all of us have experienced this, that there's not one simple answer to the complex issue of poverty. And what I appreciate about our work is that we allow students the opportunities to enter into that picture in many ways. Even if they may be coming from poverty themselves, they're entering it in a new way as students. So I just want to list off a few different aspects from which we approach poverty, and then talk about one model that I've been really invested in over the past couple of years, and maybe I'll just give a broad overview of that work for now. So one area that comes to mind very quickly is the direct ways that we approach people who are living in poverty, and that's through providing the response to immediate needs and building relationships in the process. So that looks for us on our campus like the work of our campus kitchen program, where students rescue food, prepare healthy meals, and bring it to our neighbors who live in public housing, while also doing programming with their children, attempting to do program with the adults, and generally developing relationships and understanding a little bit more about what life is like for those neighbors. That also happens in those large-scale service days that we all do, and may have a soft spot in our hearts for, or may not. How many of us like to arrange all those vans? There's another way that I think we're approaching poverty, and that's a less direct, but still through relationships, and that's in the educational programming that we're doing, hoping to help people have the capacity to eventually live into their full potential and to have more opportunity than they may currently be having. So that's another aspect, tutoring, things like that. We're also approaching it through student formation. All of this is stuff that y'all do too, but hopefully these frameworks are helpful by helping students to learn about issues, ask questions about the root causes, be exposed to new and different realities. Again, the relationship building is really important there, but eventually too making the choice to see themselves as somebody who has agency and has decided to act on these issues, which is something that we would call active citizenship, and maybe a term that y'all use on your campuses also. And finally, well not finally, but maybe one of the things that we've been really wrestling with, and I think this is a trend for programs like all of those in the room, is really figuring out how to do this whole thing that we talk about of mutually beneficial service, by looking at how we develop partnerships, by really trying to capture community voice in that, not just nonprofit leader voice, and by doing some assessment of the work that we're doing. So one way that I have learned a lot about that process is through something called the Haiti Compact. It was so good to hear the stories about Haiti this morning, and it is certainly a powerful setting in which to learn about poverty. But the work of the Haiti Compact, which is a national collective of alternative breaks programs. When I say national collective, it sounds bigger than the 6 universities that it is, but we span to LA, so we say it's national. And so the colleagues that I've been working on that effort with and I have developed a few different methods in working together to mobilize students to fight poverty and to capture the impact that we're making more efficiently than we have in the past, for example, in responses to Hurricane Katrina. So I'll talk more about that maybe at another time, but hopefully that's a helpful overview for now.
Thank you, Melanie.
Great. So I think how am I going to approach this question? I think I'll talk about what I know. We'll see. But from Washington and Lee's perspective, from the perspective of the educational institution, our approach to working in community is, because we are in the business of educating students, it's about the student's education. And that might sound selfish in one sense, but if you look at the long view, it truly is an altruistic approach, in my opinion. I view our levels of engagement, and they start with the pre-orientation trip, right? The volunteer venture at Washington and Lee, and all of these, we have the alternative breaks programs, so these programs that are co-curricular and provide opportunities in community, often sort of short opportunities, but experiences that can build on one another. Providing a development model for a student so that as they're entering our institution, so they're freshmen, they have these opportunities for engagement, which they're going to do on sort of a level, right? They come in with kind of a charity understanding of engagement, doing good, and a little bit on the short term. And as they move through our program and take the poverty introductory course and start to really dig in and see what has our country done? What is poverty, first of all? Like, what is it? How do we define it? It's kind of this dirty word. People don't like to talk about it. We have to be careful how we talk about it. And students come to the classroom feeling that. And quite frankly, when I took this job, I was like, poverty studies? I don't know if I like that word. Because there are implications to it. But classroom, you dig deeper and you start to tease out the variety of issues and the implications therein. And with that understanding, working in community, building relationships with people, and starting to move into more of a justice model of understanding. What are the systemic issues that are happening here? What is my professional interest as a student, and how can I impact this in a way that is going to be meaningful and truly impactful on these issues that collectively create disadvantaged and areas of our population that don't have the capabilities, using Marcia Sen's language, or resources that they need in order to make social movement upward. And so the model is more developmental. And you can sort of chart students' progress over the 4 years through through our program. And as they engage in the community at different levels, their work becomes more deeply impactful in some senses. They are, and I can talk about community-based research, which is something that many of our juniors and seniors are engaged in, where they're working with community partners and sort of looking at a research question and helping to dig deeper about a systemic change that might happen in our own community. We've had sort of a nonprofit institution that opened up on our campus to help people so that they can take low interest loans instead of using payday lenders in our community. And that's the kind of work as they're sort of approaching their end at Washington and Lee that we hope the students are engaged in, and then moving into their professions. So that in a nutshell.
I want to sort of build a little bit on what I had said earlier and the importance, I think, of these mission and service projects that we have students involved in as a way to help them understand the issues of poverty, the suffering that's related to poverty. But we aren't as clear on the curricular side of that at this point in our university. So we're learning from Washington and Lee. In fact, last fall we had Harlan Beckley come and speak to us on understanding and combating poverty, and he did it to come. He's a very good person for that. So that was very helpful to us. We've been very good at these works of mercy, as I've indicated. Let me just give you some idea of what we're doing. Last summer, 3 senior students went down to Wise County, Virginia for rural health care. 2 medical mission, or leading a medical mission trip to Guatemala in 2013. Another 2 nurses work with underserved women in Nicaragua. That's just the nursing program. And physical therapy, we have a medical mission trip to Nicaragua with the pharmacy and PA program here. We provide pro bono PT services to individuals in the Winchester area. We have a Center for International Programs that's working, and I won't tell you all these things, but they're doing different things in Honduras, one activity in Rwanda, and the Jamaica Field Service. Along with the Spiritual Life Office here at Shenandoah, and one of the things that is exciting about what they're doing is this year, I mentioned the Stop Hunger Now program event packaged 20,000 meals. Students have been working with something called Winchester Area Temporary Thermal Shelter. It's called WATS. And so for each week, from about November to March, a church takes the homeless population of Winchester and hosts them. And students go every Sunday night, eat with these people, and sometimes spend the night with them as part of the service during that work. Another group here takes Hungry Hearts, which every weekday students take leftover food from our dining hall and they take it to the Salvation Army and they eat with the people in that dining hall. So all these kinds of works of mercy give people a sense about what's going on, and what we are not doing as carefully, I think, is addressing issues of justice. For example, I went on a mission trip to Puerto Rico to help people there. We were on the island that was being shelled by the Navy. Do you all remember this? There was an island in Vieques. Yeah, we were at Vieques. And we did a lot of service writing, but we very seldom anybody brought up that there were these spent shells there that were causing a lot of health issues. And I wrote a few letters when I got back. Thank goodness things had already moved along, and so we could take credit for the Navy stopped shelling there 6 months later. It wasn't because of our trip, but it's a lot of other work people have been doing. But we weren't making that connection with what was going on there. So these issues of justice oftentimes don't get covered. What's helping us now is the Center for Public Service and Scholarship. Karen Schultz is director of that. And they have the work of 2 VISTA volunteers who have been doing analysis of poverty in our area. And they released a statement which is enormously helpful to service providers and to all of us who want to try to do something about poverty. So they're doing the research. We can tie into the Northern Virginia Regional Commission's work, and they're going to be using our work. Our regional forum on poverty that we had service providers and others. We looked at 5 or 6 different areas: advocacy, hunger, homelessness, healthcare, and we had groups revolve around that. We have information from each of those groups, and we're going to try to learn and apply that now. It's going to take a while. We're not as far along as some of you may be in that. But, so we're gathering that information along with the other service providers and statewide or federal agencies.
So I think John presents a good example of a role that the university can take in collecting data to illustrate a need. I'll ask one more question, then open it up to the audience for the last 15 minutes or so. And not everybody needs to answer this. The question is, let's be critical of ourselves for a moment. We've talked about better or best practices, and we can list all of our universities and colleges, can put a laundry list together of things that we do to make ourselves feel good about our work. Let's be critical and say, what are unintended negative consequences? When are there times that we accidentally perpetuate isms or stereotypes? And have you seen that? And what do you think? So that's part A, is have you seen that? Those unintended negative consequences. Good deeds are not always enough. And secondly, if someone could answer, what do you think is the role of the university in addressing poverty? So answer one or both of those, how you feel most comfortable, and then I'll open it up for the questions from the audience. And anybody can start.
One of the saddest things I hear, unless somebody else, is when students, last semester I was able to go under our, we send 55 students to 5 different countries free of charge in spring break. And I took 11 students to Mozambique. It's about number 200 in the top. I mean, it's number 200 in the CIA's poverty list of impoverished countries. And so we were, I think there were 220, and it's like 210. I mean, it was desperately poor. And to hear students come back from that kind of trip and just say, well, how blessed we are in the United States. And, and you hear this around Thanksgiving too. But anyway, I mean, it's sort of like that somehow we are blessed. And, we try to address that, but it's a hard thing to overcome. Just the sense that going to another developing country and feeling like, isn't it so much better here, and how much we've been blessed for some reason, and not seeming to understand the dynamics of poverty and what's going on in these situations. So that's a sad thing that I see. And I think as we see that in terms of service too, that it's kind of so that's a constant work to try to address and understand why people are poor.
I think one of the, something that I keep in mind and think is important is respecting and appreciating the role of our agency partners and recognizing that they are our mentors to our students. And that particularly short-term service trips have sort of limited, there's limited impact the student can have. And for me, it has been important to recognize that, and I think to work with our agency partners and saying, we want to be helpful, but also we recognize that you are you are giving, you are giving us a lot. You're paying it forward. You're helping to educate this, this generation of students as they move forward and hopefully engage in that service work. And the reality is that these organizations that we're going into and students who are becoming educated on these issues, which are very personal to people, can have unintended consequences as they progress through their own education. And I think that it's just vitally important to be aware of that, to prepare students, to prepare expectations, both on from the agency and from the student, as best we can, to sort of minimize any unwanted kind of collateral damage that quite frankly just can happen.
Trying to formulate how to say something new, because my colleagues up here really captured a lot of the struggle, but one of the things, I have a couple of things coming back to me, and one is a session that I was in last night with some of our alternative break leaders on international trips, and the topic was reorientation, which is the piece that matters most. You go on your trip, you prepare a long time for it, you feel like you've done some really good things, maybe in country or maybe not. But if students come back and don't figure out a way to take that next step, then the piece about how the community partners are paying it forward doesn't get paid any more forward, right? And so we're talking to these students about what are the challenges of reorientation, and that's one of the biggest struggles, and I think are really unintended consequences, much as I and the student directors that I'm working with intend like crazy for our participants to be advocates and allies and involved with the issue when they come back to campus, or even for local projects to take it to the next semester, to take it into their classrooms. Midterms come and family pressures, whatever it is that distracts our students or feels like a higher priority or feels like something they can get their hands around and their head around more easily than the complexity of the issues that they face in communities. So that I think is the biggest challenge, and it is something that I wrestle with in my heart and soul a lot, and I know that y'all do too. Because we do this work because we want to, at least I think a lot of us really want to be effective in changing how reality is for people. We want to be in solidarity with people, but it is hard to do, and it's hard to teach that to students. The other thing that I would say is when I look back on my time as a college student, I was doing a lot of community service, and a lot of it with the faith and justice perspective. I had such good formation, but I did not know how to be an advocate afterward, and it took me probably 10 years to learn. And so that is hopeful for me. As long as we keep forming our students with those messages as they live more into it, I think there is potential for that to become power in their lives and in the lives of the communities in which they live. Sure.
So we've hit on a number of different factors that really essentially support college student growth and development in understanding relating to being in kinship with others. But I do hope we spend a little bit of time talking about the natural tension and friction that comes along with being affiliated with a system, with being affiliated with a system that essentially is one of the two core components to pulling people out of poverty. In order for Bureau of Labor Statistics, research studies will conclude that those that have a college degree and are more likely to have employment. Those that have employment are much more likely to not be in poverty. And so we are all a part of systems that encourage, in the best of ways, encourage the ability for people to be pulled out of poverty. However, we are also part of systems that, quite frankly, not everybody has access to. And so I think that's part of the push and pull and the natural tension that is the reality of the role of the university or the college in combating poverty is that we're a part of a system that in its best of ways is intended to be a really key ingredient. We spend a lot of time talking about ways in which students grow and develop, and so that for the long term they might become advocates, or they might spend a lifetime working to alleviate poverty. But the other part of this is the reality is that we're part of a system that is both good and bad to alleviating poverty. Let me open it up for questions. We've got about 10 minutes, so hopefully we'll be able to answer 2 or 3 questions and then continue this conversation throughout today. Yes, Eric.
One thing that struck me, Drew, is you phrased this really well to the panel. You at first asked them, what practices for understanding need in the community do you have? And then I noticed that all of you fell into what we normally do, which is kind of naming the programs that you have to address the needs. But I wonder if we could go back and revisit and step back for a moment. If you could think just for a moment about how do we figure out what needs there are before we begin generating these programs? I wonder if we could revisit that part of Drew's question for a moment.
May I start? That's a great, and after I spoke, I thought, so, thank you. And I don't know if this is actually going to directly answer what you're asking or not, but something that in working with community, I think, and in being representing the academic institution, we have service learning courses, so through our community-based research program, right? So there are these sort of research questions. And that can go 2 ways. Who generates a research question? Is it the community partner or is it the classroom? And we've had to work and refocus, because the real tendency is obviously to do what's easiest, which is, our faculty member in psychology specializes in a particular area, and she has a research question that would work really well in our community. That's using your community as a petri dish in a way, and that's not what we want to do. And that doesn't build a strong relationship and trust. So what we have over time, I feel like what we're realizing and what we're focusing on more successfully is that through the engagement of our students in programs, they are building relationship with both the clients and the organizational members, right? So the staff in the agency, the executive directors in the agency. And because we have a sustained relationship with the program over the course of years, they had worked with many students, but we've got this long-term relationship and that trust builds. It's from that the conversation about what would be helpful to you after school program, what would be helpful, how can we be of service to you? We have great resources on this end. That's where the research question is generated and brought back to campus. What gets a little messy, if you sort of play that out, is you can have a whole list of research questions, but not quite the faculty, so then it's sort of this matching period. But what we have found is that has been much more successful. And then sort of not all of our projects are attached to faculty research. Lots of students in community-based research are working in small student groups under the supervision of a faculty, so it doesn't have to be their specialty area. The success, I feel, of what we're doing is that what I most often see are students who started and they did a volunteer venture, they did a pre-O trip, they came in, they volunteered at the campus kitchens, they're sort of getting acclimated in the town-gown relation, they're crossing the bridge, and it's their personal investment in our community tied with what they're learning in the classroom, and really focusing their interests and their experiences that really deepens their ability to understand the dynamics of the community environment. And from that, they actually generate really powerful, I think, ways of engaging and helping the community actually move forward. But that's that's long-term. I mean, that takes years, and then you've got students building on other students' projects, so there's some continuity there. And I have some examples of that, but I've talked a little too long, so I can talk about more of that later.
Why don't we do this? We have about 5 more minutes, so we'll ask one more. I think Melody was going to have a response. So ask one more person to respond, and then I want to open it up for some more questions. So go ahead.
Okay, so I'll just quickly touch on 3 different things that come to mind in response to your question. One is we were doing a really good job of getting advice from faculty, staff, and students on campus for a while as our office was undergoing some structural changes, and one of the areas that we saw was missing was community voice. So a couple of years ago, I developed a community advisory committee for our office with exactly that question. What are the needs in the community? Is what we're doing addressing those needs? Are we missing out on something, and what would you suggest? What I'll say is that sounds like dreamland I thought it was going to be when we started it up, and it has actually been extremely hard work because we find that there's that dynamic of community people maybe saying what they think we want to hear, and then they stop coming to meetings. So that has been a wrestle for us, but we recently underwent a revamp this summer after I interviewed several different universities across the country, and we had coffee with our community partners at different times, and we're going to give it another go. So I'd love to talk with y'all more about that, especially if anybody's having any success in that area. Another thing is we've been using a model of work plans. I mentioned it before, but it's sort of just a tool of guiding that conversation with community partners, saying, what do you need? What does success look like to you? How can we provide something that isn't already happening in your neighborhood or with your constituency? And talking that through. I will say that one of the challenges, I'm thinking back to our first trip to Haiti when we were talking to people about what is it that you need, that's a dangerous question to ask, because we found ourselves one day having Coke sitting across the table from a man who said, I need $40,000. And we're like, we can bring you 12 students for a week. So it is really tough territory, and it takes a lot of honesty, and it took some nerve to continue with that conversation and talk about what we actually can offer versus what the real need is. And finally, I just want to say that through those relationships, just to echo what Fran said, that's where students start to get it and start to understand the need and ask the questions, because there's love there and there's connection there, and that opens up a longer journey for them too.
You can obviously see where this push and pull is between who are you beholden to? What is your mission? Reviewing the mission statement of your office. What is it about? When it comes down to it, at the end of the day, what is it that you're trying to, where you're trying to move the needle? If you're trying to move the needle completely with respect to student growth and development and student impact, then I think you really need to be honest with your community partner and share that. If you're genuinely trying to assess impact in community, then you need to do that. And at the end of the day, too, the push and pull is that we are beholden to an extent to our students. One more question.
Drew?
Yes.
Just curious, if any of you have thought about or had any experience with, in terms of community relationships and partnerships, identifying and supporting indigenous leadership and empowering those partners.
I'm thinking, there's probably there.
Well, my initial sort of thought on that is, there's a formula that I think has to be in place, right? So first there has to be a relationship and trust, and it has to be a long-term relationship and trust. And then there's the sticky wicket question of who's the expert here, right? And so how do you, I mean, I guess part of me would be like, what does that mean? Like empowerment in what respect, and what role would actually a student have in that, or is it sort of this partnership of an advocacy, you know, as a group of students and a faculty or some sort of body of people together working with an organization to embolden its own leadership somehow. That is a,
I think you bring up a really great point for us to ponder and consider. And I have noticed that there are folks that are trying to do that, and I think it works best or better. I don't say best, better when you've got a faculty member who's then going to commit his or her
Right.
career to this kind of work, so that students then see themselves as actors in this long play,
that's right.
in this long activity, so that they see that there's a history to this, and that we're in the middle of something that takes time and is difficult. We've watched that play out at William & Mary over the last decade or so with one professor and one community, international community. And for every step forward, there's 2 steps back. The concept, though, is utilizing a leadership theoretical model that over time we wouldn't need it anymore. The point is that you find out who has aspiration toward leadership within communities, so that you're no longer needed.
I do have one answer to that question now that I've thought about it a little bit longer. A lot of our graduates surprisingly stay in the area. I doubt that's true as much for maybe the others, but at any rate, I think of one student who was a Spanish major. She works in something called the Latino Connection. She's become the leader of the Hispanic community. She was Governor Kane's Hispanic, what was it called? Well, another student who was here studied, I took a teaching course in philosophy of nonviolence. She was in that and some other things. She was a psychology major. She visited some at the Laurel Center, which was a women's center here, a shelter for women, and she's now taking leadership roles in that. So we see a lot of our students taking leadership roles, coming out of us and becoming leaders in the community, indigenous leaders in the community. And I don't know if that's the model you're looking at, but we haven't trained people in the community, but these are people who, a lot of them are from the community, who've gone to college here and stay in the community and serve afterwards. So.
I know our time is short, but I will always allow Rich Harris to say something, because he will always be your mentor. So Rich, you have the last word.
Pressure's on now. Just kind of going to your point, because I think we do a lot of times look to individuals and we to example a faculty member or an outstanding person in the community. But I still think we don't look at the structural setup for that, because faculty members still lead.
Right.
That I think the real challenge is institutionally, how do we set up the structure in order to continue that? And 2 thoughts. One, that's the challenge, because our institutions sometimes perpetuate the thing that we're actually trying to change. Or some of us in service learning or community engagement, we are kind of that island. Go see those people, they'll know how to do it. The other, with indigenous leadership, a lot of times they do not have access to power or understanding of the change process. So it's really messy when you start off, because they're modeling a leadership model that doesn't work, or is not very effective, or not very just in and of itself. So I think that long-term relationship I agree with, but I think unless we have some kind of structural change to that, and that is the challenge, because that's easier to do. Let one faculty member do this or one office do that.
Sort of an institutional commitment
Yeah.
to it.
The ones I always think of is like Berea College. I mean, they have really committed an institutional change. We are going to educate low-income families. And it's great. I mean, they have a tremendous track record of spinning people out of poverty. I'm not as aware of their local community. But they do it to the point where they have a real recruitment challenge, because they can't recruit 2nd-generation college students, because everybody gets spun out of poverty. So the children of their graduates can't come to Berea College. What a wonderful problem to have. But that's, to me, is just, that would be something I would hold up as kind of a better practice as an institutional commitment.
See, my intuition was right. Thank you, Rich. That was a great comment. Thank you, Rich. And thank you to the panelists so much. Thank you for your insights and your willingness to open up to us. Thank you.